Bryan Keller thought he had found love with Samodi Fonsek, but what he didn't know was that behind her perfect smile hid a controlling obsession that would end in the most chilling way imaginable. This isn't just a breakup gone wrong. This is the terrifying case of a girlfriend who turned into a killer. Bryan Keller had never been the kind of guy who chased drama. He worked a steady job at a small software firm in San Diego, kept a quiet circle of friends, and spent his weekends hiking or gaming. At 28, he was more focused on stability than wild romance. So when he met Samodi Fonsek at his local gym, it felt like something new but good. She was striking, confident, and had an air of mystery about her. She approached him first, which caught him off guard. After a few workouts together, they started meeting outside the gym. Within weeks, they were officially dating. Their connection seemed electric. Samodi was fun, attentive, and affectionate. She remembered everything he liked, brought him his favorite snacks, and even cleaned his apartment once while he was out. At first, Bryan found it charming. After a string of casual dates in the past, this felt like something real. He introduced her to a couple of his friends, and they were impressed with her poise and how much she seemed to care about him. Even his mom, who he facetimed weekly, noted that he looked happier. But beneath the surface, things were moving at a pace Bryan didn't fully control. Samodi began inserting herself into every part of his daily routine. She wanted to know where he was at all times. She started showing up at his workplace to drop off lunch without warning, asking for his phone when she felt insecure, and requesting his email passwords so there'd be no secrets between them. Bryan laughed it off at first, thinking she was just intense, maybe a little overprotective. But no one wants to admit that the person who makes them feel special might also be manipulating them. Within 2 months, they were practically living together. Samodi stayed at Bryan's apartment more nights than not. She brought her clothes, reorganized his kitchen, and even suggested that he cancel his gym membership to join hers instead. More time together, she said. Bryan didn't argue, not out loud at least, but something started to feel off. His space didn't feel like his anymore. His texts and emails were often checked by Samodi while he slept. When he went out with friends without her, she would call dozens of times in the span of an hour. The control was creeping in slowly, disguised as love. Whenever he brought up feeling overwhelmed, she would shift the blame. She'd cry, say she felt unwanted, that maybe she wasn't good enough. Bryan didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to emotional manipulation, and guilt often won out over logic. He stopped seeing some friends. He stopped mentioning female co-workers altogether. He learned to filter his own words to avoid triggering a meltdown dot at this point. Bryan thought he was doing what couples did, adjusting, compromising. He didn't know he was being isolated, step by step. Samodi wasn't just moving into his apartment, she was moving into his mind, reshaping his world until he couldn't tell what was normal anymore. What began as a romance was becoming something far darker. He just hadn't realized it yet. As weeks turned into months, Bryan's life no longer felt like his own. Every decision he made, what he wore, where he went, who he spoke to, had to be filtered through what Samodi might think or say. She wasn't just possessive, she was obsessed with control. Her affection was still present, but it came with conditions, expectations, and subtle punishments when those expectations weren't met. And the moments of calm between storms became shorter and shorter. It started with questions. Why didn't you reply faster? Who was that woman who liked your photo? Then came the accusations, baseless but delivered with conviction. If Bryan disagreed or tried to defend himself, Samodi would spiral. She would scream, cry, threaten to disappear forever, or claim she would hurt herself if he left her. Each time, he would back down, trying to restore peace. But peace with Samodi was temporary and fragile. Like walking on cracked glass. One evening, Bryan arrived home late after a company dinner. He had told her in advance, shared pictures from the event, even video called her during the evening. Still, when he opened the door, he found the apartment trashed, picture frames broken, drawers pulled open, his favorite jacket shredded with scissors. Samodi sat on the couch, eerily calm, sipping wine. She accused him of cheating with a co-worker he had barely spoken to. She claimed she had proof but never showed any. Bryan wanted to leave, but she blocked the door. He ended up sleeping in the car that night. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. Bryan confided in an old friend via a private messaging app. He shared some screenshots of her obsessive texts and admitted he was scared of her reactions, of what she might do if he tried to leave. His friend urged him to get out, to create distance and think about his safety. But Bryan was trapped by fear and guilt. He worried about what she might do to herself. She had made threats, before once texting him a photo of pills spilled across a counter with the words, "This is what it feels like to be without you." The psychological manipulation intensified. Samodi insisted on installing a shared GPS tracker so they could always feel close. But it became another tool of control. If Bryan deviated from his usual route home, she would call immediately. If he didn't pick up, she would leave long, angry voicemails filled with accusations and profanity. The calm, charming woman he had fallen for was gone. In her place was someone unpredictable and terrifying. Then things got even stranger. Bryan noticed his emails had been read before he opened them. His bank account had small, unexplained withdrawals. His home printer began spitting out pages screenshots of his own social media history, timestamps of locations, lists of every woman who'd interacted with him online in the last 2 years. It was overwhelming. It felt like she was building a case against him, but for what? He didn't know. Every day became a performance. Smile, agree, reassure. Don't trigger her. Don't fight back. Bryan knew something was terribly wrong, but he didn't yet know just how far Samodi was willing to go. What he did know was that his freedom, privacy, and safety were slowly being stripped away until all that remained was fear. Bryan Keller had reached a breaking point. He wasn't sleeping well, constantly anxious, and felt like a prisoner in his own home. The fear wasn't just emotional, it was physical now. He'd begun noticing strange things, like the same car, parked outside his office for days, or unfamiliar knocks at his apartment door late at night, with no one there. Once, he found his tires slashed. Another time, a dead bird was left on his doorstep. He didn't want to believe Samodi could be involved, but deep down, he couldn't ignore the pattern. One weekend, Bryan made a quiet plan to leave. He packed a small bag while Samodi was out and drove to a friend's place across town, someone she didn't know. He turned off his phone, deleted her contact, and left a short note on the table saying he needed space. He hoped that would be enough. But that same night, she found him. His friend returned from the store to find Samodi sitting on the front steps. She was calm, eerily polite, claiming she was just looking for Bryan. She had tracked him using an old location-sharing app still active on one of his devices. Bryan was inside, frozen, watching her through the window. He refused to answer the door. Eventually, after sitting outside for nearly an hour, she left without saying a word. The next morning, she was gone, but so was Bryan's car. He reported it stolen, and police recovered it abandoned in a parking lot 2 towns away. The seats were slashed and every item inside down to the floor mats was removed. Still, there was no direct evidence tying it to Samodi. Feeling cornered, Bryan decided to take formal steps. He began documenting everything: messages, strange phone calls, visits, anything suspicious. He met with a lawyer about a restraining order, but he was told it would take time and evidence. Samodi hadn't physically harmed him yet, and many of her actions, while unsettling, fell into grey legal territory. But Bryan's instincts told him it wouldn't end with stalking. Then, one Monday morning, Bryan didn't show up for work. No calls, no emails, no texts. Co-workers grew worried. A colleague went to his apartment and found the door locked but the lights on. After several unanswered knocks, the landlord was contacted to open it. Inside, everything was in place except for Bryan. His wallet was on the table. His phone was charging. His shoes were by the door, but he was gone. The bathroom floor was damp, a towel left in a heap. There was a faint smell of bleach in the air, and on the floor, barely noticeable, was a single silver earring that didn't belong to Bryan. Police arrived quickly and found signs of a struggle that had been partially cleaned up. There was a smudge of blood on the door frame, and fragments of broken glass beneath the bed. But no body. No clear evidence of what had happened, only the unmistakable sense that Bryan hadn't left by choice. Samodi, when contacted by authorities, claimed she hadn't seen or spoken to him in weeks. Her tone was flat, unbothered. She insisted they had broken up and she'd moved on. But as police dug deeper, inconsistencies began to surface, and the search for Bryan Keller turned from a missing persons case into something far more chilling. 2 weeks passed without any trace of Bryan Keller. Missing person posters were circulated. Social media was flooded with pleas for help, and local news stations picked up the story. His disappearance didn't make sense. No known enemies, no signs he planned to flee, and a life that appeared stable from the outside. But those who knew what he had been going through began raising concerns about one person, Samodi Fonsek. Despite her denial of recent contact, police discovered that Samodi had tried to reset Bryan's email password 3 days before he vanished. She had also made several purchases using his debit card, including cleaning supplies, a tarp, and zip ties, all within a 48-hour window of his disappearance. The receipts were time-stamped to match gaps in her claimed whereabouts. It was the first solid crack in her alibi. Investigators began combing through local surveillance footage from stores, gas stations, and ATM machines. One video stood out: in grainy security footage from a self-storage facility on the outskirts of town. A woman resembling Samodi was seen entering Unit 14 carrying a large duffel bag. She wore a baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses and gloves. The timestamp was just a day after Bryan was last seen. The unit was rented under the name Samantha F. and paid for in cash. When authorities arrived with a warrant, the smell hit them before the door even opened. Inside was a grim and shocking sight of blue. Plastic barrels sealed with duct tape, partially hidden under a tarp. Dried bleach stains marked the floor around it, and there was an overwhelming odor of decomposition. The barrel was transported to the medical examiner's office, where it was carefully opened. Inside, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic, were human remains, later confirmed through dental records to be Bryan Keller. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, followed by asphyxiation. There were also ligature marks on his wrists, suggesting he had been restrained before he died. Forensic investigators found Samodi's fingerprints on the barrel's tape, and a utility knife left behind in the unit. Even more disturbing was the discovery of a small voice recorder buried among the trash in the corner of the room. It contained several recorded monologues from Samodi rambling, emotional rants where she spoke about betrayal, punishment and control. In one, she whispered, "If I can't have him, no one will," with overwhelming evidence. Samodi was arrested at her mother's home without incident. Her expression was cold and blank as officers read her the charges. Inside her bedroom, police recovered Bryan's missing laptop and a journal filled with disturbing writings. Page after page detailed her frustrations, jealousy, and a twisted view of love that eventually turned into obsession. What started as a romance had ended in a calculated and horrifying act of violence. The case that once lacked a single clue had now become one of the most chilling investigations in the city's history, and the quiet woman once seen as devoted had been unmasked as something far more dangerous, a predator cloaked in charm. The trial of Samodi Fonsek began 6 months after her arrest. It quickly captured national attention. The public was gripped not just by the horrifying nature of the crime, but by the disturbing contrast between Samodi's outward appearance and the cold, calculated brutality she had carried out behind closed doors. Dubbed the girlfriend from hell by media outlets, her courtroom demeanor only added to the fascination. Calm, expressionless, and almost eerily detached, she showed no sign of remorse as the evidence was presented against her. Prosecutors laid out a devastating case. They walked the jury through a timeline of escalating abuse, control, and psychological manipulation. They displayed the receipts for cleaning chemicals, the video of her entering the storage unit, and the disturbing voice recordings she had made. Experts testified about the behavioral patterns of obsessive partners and how Samodi's actions followed a textbook path of coercive control, isolation, and ultimately violence. The medical examiner's report left no doubt. Bryan Keller had been killed in his home and hidden away like garbage, but it was the journal entries that delivered the heaviest blow. Pages and pages written in her own hand revealed fantasies of punishing Bryan, of making him disappear, and disturbing passages that portrayed her view of love as ownership. One entry read, "He belongs to me. If he runs, I'll take him apart piece by piece until he listens again." Another included a crude drawing of a barrel with the word "peace" written underneath it. Samodi's defense team argued mental instability. They presented psychological evaluations suggesting borderline personality disorder and emotional dysregulation. But the prosecution countered with evidence of clear planning, renting the storage unit days before. Bryan disappeared, deleting security camera footage at his apartment building and carefully cleaning the crime scene. This was not a crime of passion. It was premeditated, deliberate, and chillingly precise. The trial lasted just over 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for only 9 hours before returning with a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, unlawful confinement, identity theft, and obstruction of justice. The judge handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In his final statement, he called the crime an act of unthinkable cruelty born from obsession and domination. Bryan's family spoke at the sentencing. His mother described the slow unraveling of her son, the helplessness of watching him fade into someone else under the weight of manipulation. His sister read from messages Bryan had sent her in the weeks before he died. Worried, confused, yet still hopeful things would improve. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. In the aftermath, Bryan's story became a national conversation about emotional abuse, stalking, and the signs that often go unnoticed until it's too late. His loved ones launched a foundation in his name to raise awareness about coercive control in relationships and support victims who feel trapped and silenced. Samodi Fonsek disappeared from the headlines soon after her sentencing, but the legacy of her actions, the damage, the fear, the life stolen remains. Bryan Keller had simply wanted love. What he found instead was a nightmare that ended in a barrel, hidden away by the woman who claimed to care for him more than anyone else ever could.